What happens when two powerhouse women from different eras of music sit down for what should be a lighthearted conversation, only for things to spiral into one of the most uncomfortable moments in daytime television history. The tension was palpable. The words were sharp, and before anyone knew it, one of the Spice Girls was walking off set, leaving Kelly Clarkson speechless and the audience in stunned silence. This is the story of how a simple interview turned into a heated clash that nobody saw coming. Before we dive into this wild story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below telling us what you think about what went down. Now let's get into it. Kelly Clarkson welcomed Mel C onto her show with the kind of warmth and enthusiasm she brings to every guest. The audience cheered as Mel walked out, waving and smiling, clearly excited to be there. Kelly stood up, gave her a hug, and they both settled into their seats. Everything seemed perfectly normal. Kelly started with the usual pleasantries, talking about how much she loved the Spice Girls growing up, how their music shaped a generation, and how incredible it was to have Sporty Spice sitting right there on her couch. Mel C smiled graciously, thanking Kelly for having her and agreeing that those days were magical. She talked about the new projects she had been working on, her solo career, and how fulfilling it was to still be making music after all these years. Kelly nodded along, asking questions about the creative process and what it was like transitioning from being part of such a massive group to carving out her own identity as an artist. The conversation flowed easily at first, with both women laughing and sharing stories. Then Kelly shifted gears slightly. She brought up nostalgia, asking Mel what it felt like to look back at the Spice Girls era now. Decades later, Mel answered thoughtfully, saying that while she cherished those memories, she had worked hard to establish herself beyond that chapter of her life. She emphasized that she was proud of everything the group accomplished, but that she had grown as an artist and as a person since then. Kelly smiled and said she totally understood, but then she made a comment that seemed innocent enough on the surface. She said something along the lines of how no matter what anyone from the Spice Girls does now, people will always see them as part of that iconic group first. It was meant as an observation, maybe even a compliment about their lasting impact. But the way it landed with Mel was clearly different. Mel paused for a moment, her smile fading just slightly. She said that while she appreciated the legacy of the Spice Girls, it was frustrating when people refused to acknowledge the work she had done independently. She mentioned that she had released multiple solo albums, toured extensively on her own, and built a career that stood separate from the group. Her tone was still polite, but there was an edge to it now, a hint of defensiveness that had not been there before. Kelly quickly tried to clarify, saying she did not mean to diminish Mel's solo work at all. She said she had massive respect for anyone who could step out of a successful group and make it on their own. But then she added another comment, saying that it must be hard though because the Spice Girls were such a cultural phenomenon that anything else would naturally feel like it was in their shadow. She said it almost sympathetically, like she was trying to relate, but it only seemed to make things worse. Mel stiffened in her seat. She responded by saying that her solo career was not in anyone's shadow and that she had worked hard for too long to have it framed that way. She pointed out that she had earned her place in the music industry on her own merit, not just because of her past. Her voice was calm but firm. The audience shifted uncomfortably, sensing that the friendly vibe of the interview was quickly evaporating. Kelly looked a bit taken aback. She tried to smooth things over, saying she did not mean it like that and that she thought Mel's solo work was amazing. But Mel was not letting it go. She said that this was exactly the problem, that even when people claimed to support her solo career, they always brought it back to the Spice Girls, as if that was the only thing that mattered. She said it felt dismissive, like everything she had accomplished on her own was just a footnote. The tension in the room was thick now. Kelly stammered slightly, clearly trying to figure out how to steer the conversation back to safer ground. She said she genuinely did not mean to offend, and that she was just trying to have a conversation about how iconic the Spice Girls were. But Mel cut her off, saying that maybe that was the issue, that people were so obsessed with the past that they could not see what was happening in the present. Kelly's expression changed. She looked frustrated now, like she was tired of walking on eggshells. She said that she was just trying to celebrate Mel's history, and that there was nothing wrong with acknowledging how important the Spice Girls were to pop culture. She added that plenty of artists would kill to have that kind of legacy, and that maybe Mel should be a bit more grateful for it instead of treating it like a burden. The moment those words left Kelly's mouth, the entire energy of the interview shifted. Mel's eyes widened slightly, and she sat up straighter. She said that gratitude had nothing to do with it, and that Kelly was completely missing the point. She said she was not ashamed of the Spice Girls, but she was tired of being reduced to just that, especially by people who should understand the struggle of being seen as more than one thing. Kelly fired back, saying that she did understand. She said she had dealt with her own share of being boxed in by people's expectations. She said that she won American Idol and spent years trying to prove she was more than just a reality show winner. But she said the difference was that she did not get defensive every time someone brought it up, because she knew it was part of her story. That comparison did not sit well with Mel at all. She leaned forward slightly, her jaw tight, and said that winning a talent competition and being part of a manufactured girl group were two completely different things. She said that Kelly chose to enter American Idol, that it was a stepping stone she used intentionally, whereas the Spice Girls became something that consumed their individual identities, whether they wanted it to or not. She said Kelly had no idea what it was like to be constantly compared to 4 other people, to have every solo move questioned, to be told that she was nothing without the others. Kelly looked genuinely offended now. She said that was incredibly unfair, and that she had faced her own battles with critics and with being pigeonholed. She said that just because their experiences were not identical did not mean she could not relate. She added that Mel was being dismissive of her perspective, which was ironic considering that was exactly what Mel was accusing her of doing. The back and forth was escalating quickly now, and the audience was completely silent, watching this unfold like a car crash they could not look away from. Mel shook her head and said that Kelly was making it about herself when the conversation was supposed to be about Mel's career. She said this was typical, that hosts invited guests on and then turned everything into their own narratives. Kelly's face flushed. She said that was not what she was doing at all, that she was simply trying to find common ground and have an actual conversation instead of just lobbing softball questions. She said that if Mel wanted to come on the show and just get praised without any real discussion, maybe she should have done a podcast interview instead. Mel laughed, but it was not a friendly laugh. It was sharp and incredulous. She said that there was a difference between having a real conversation and being condescending, and that Kelly had crossed that line. She said that Kelly's comments about being grateful and about her solo work being in the shadow of the Spice Girls were out of line, especially coming from someone who claimed to be a fan. Kelly snapped back, saying that she was a fan, but that did not mean she had to agree with everything Mel said or pretend that the Spice Girls were not a massive part of who she was. She said that Mel could not erase her past just because it was inconvenient for her current narrative. She added that maybe the reason people kept bringing up the Spice Girls was because that was when Mel was at her best, and that her solo career, while respectable, had never reached those same heights. The audience gasped. That was a low blow, and everyone knew it. Mel stared at Kelly for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she said very calmly that she could not believe Kelly had just said that. She said that Kelly of all people should understand what it was like to be constantly measured against a previous version of yourself. To have people dismiss your current work because it does not have the same commercial success as something you did years ago. Kelly opened her mouth to respond, but Mel kept going. She said that Kelly had built her entire brand on being relatable, on being the down-to-earth girl who understood struggle and hard work, but that right now she was being anything but relatable. She said that Kelly was being judgmental and cruel, and that she expected better from someone who had been through their own public battles. Kelly looked stunned. She said that she was not being cruel, that she was being honest, and that maybe Mel was just too sensitive to handle an actual conversation. She said that if Mel could not take a little pushback, then maybe she was not as tough as Sporty Spice was supposed to be. That was it. That was the moment everything fell apart. Mel stood up abruptly, pulling off her microphone. She said that she was done, that she did not need to sit there and be insulted on national television. She said that Kelly could finish the segment however she wanted, but she would not be a part of it. The audience was frozen. Nobody knew whether to react or stay quiet. Kelly stood up too, saying that Mel was overreacting and that she should sit back down so they could talk this out like adults, but Mel was already walking toward the side of the stage. She said over her shoulder that there was nothing left to talk about, that Kelly had shown exactly who she was, and that Mel had better things to do than waste her time there. Kelly called after her, saying that walking off was unprofessional, and that Mel was proving her point about being too sensitive. Mel stopped for just a second, turned back, and said that what was unprofessional was inviting someone onto your show just to tear them down. Then she disappeared behind the curtain, leaving Kelly standing there alone on stage. The camera stayed on Kelly, who looked equal parts angry and shocked. She turned to the audience and said something about how she did not expect that to happen, that she was just trying to have an honest conversation. She said that sometimes people could not handle the truth and that she stood by everything she said, but you could tell she was rattled, that she had not anticipated the interview going that far off the rails. The producers cut to a commercial break almost immediately. And when the show came back, Kelly had moved on to the next segment without addressing what had just happened. But the damage was done. The clip of Mel walking off spread like wildfire online, with people taking sides almost instantly. Some said Mel overreacted, that Kelly was just being real, and that Mel could not handle criticism. Others said Kelly was out of line, that she had been condescending and dismissive from the start, and that Mel had every right to leave. The debate raged across social media, with fans of both women defending their favorite and attacking the other. Some pointed out that Kelly had a history of speaking her mind, sometimes to the point of being blunt, and that this was just who she was. Others argued that there was a difference between being honest and being hurtful, and that Kelly had crossed that line. Meanwhile, Mel's supporters praised her for standing up for herself and not tolerating disrespect, while her critics said she was being overly defensive and could not handle a challenging interview. What made the whole situation even more complicated was that both women had valid points buried underneath all the emotion and defensiveness. Kelly was not wrong that the Spice Girls were a huge part of Mel's identity, and that legacy was something millions of people connected with. It was natural for interviewers and fans to want to talk about it. But Mel was also not wrong that constantly being defined by something from decades ago, no matter how successful, could feel limiting and frustrating, especially when you had worked so hard to prove yourself beyond it. The problem was that neither of them could see past their own perspective in that moment. Kelly felt like she was just doing her job, having a real conversation instead of a fluff piece. And she probably thought she was giving Mel an opportunity to address something that a lot of people wondered about. But what Kelly did not seem to realize was that her tone and her word choices came across as dismissive. Whether she intended them that way or not, telling someone their solo career was in the shadow of their group work or suggesting they should be more grateful for their past are things that sound supportive in theory, but can feel patronizing in practice. On the other side, Mel came into the interview already carrying the weight of years of being reduced to just one part of her career. She had probably answered variations of the same questions hundreds of times, always having to defend her solo work, always having to explain that she was more than just sporty Spice. So when Kelly brought it up, even casually, Mel was already primed to be defensive. She heard criticism where Kelly might have meant observation, and she reacted accordingly. But then the conversation escalated because neither of them was willing to back down. Kelly doubled down on her position instead of acknowledging how her words might have landed poorly. And Mel doubled down on her frustration instead of giving Kelly the benefit of the doubt. They both got caught up in defending themselves and proving they were right. And that turned what could have been a productive conversation into a public argument. The comment Kelly made about Mel being at her best during the Spice Girls era was particularly damaging. Even if there was some truth to it from a commercial standpoint, saying it out loud on television was harsh. It was the kind of thing that might get said in a private, blunt conversation between friends, but saying it to someone's face on a talk show in front of an audience and cameras was bound to hurt. And Kelly had to have known that. Whether she said it out of frustration, or because she genuinely believed Mel needed to hear it, or because she was just tired of being accused of being dismissive, it was still a line that probably should not have been crossed. Mel's reaction to that comment showed just how deeply it cut. Up until that point, she had been frustrated and defensive, but she had still been engaging. Once Kelly said that, though, Mel shut down completely. She went from arguing her case to deciding the conversation was not worth having any more. And you could see it in her face. That moment where she realized that no matter what she said, Kelly was not going to understand where she was coming from. That was when she decided to leave. Kelly's response to Mel walking off was interesting, too. She could have let it go, acknowledged that things got heated, and moved on gracefully. But instead, she kept pushing, calling after Mel and saying she was overreacting. That suggested that Kelly genuinely did not think she had done anything wrong, or at least was not willing to admit it in the moment. She felt attacked and defensive, too, and she wanted to make sure the audience knew that she stood by what she said. The audience's reaction throughout all of this was telling. They were silent for most of the argument, which is unusual for a talk show. Normally, audiences on these shows are quick to applaud or react, but in this case, they seemed unsure of what to do. Nobody wanted to pick a side publicly, and nobody wanted to make the situation worse by cheering or booing. They just sat there watching two women they probably admired tear into each other. When the show came back from commercial, and Kelly moved on without addressing the walk-off, it felt jarring. The audience had just witnessed something uncomfortable and real. And then suddenly they were supposed to pretend it had not happened and enjoy the rest of the show. Kelly tried to keep her energy up, but you could tell she was distracted. Her smile did not quite reach her eyes, and her interactions with the next guest felt a little forced. Meanwhile, the internet was already dissecting every second of the confrontation. People were making clips, adding commentary, breaking down body language, and arguing in the comments. Some people were Team Kelly, saying that she was just being honest and that Mel could not handle the truth. They pointed out that Kelly had a reputation for keeping things real on her show and that guests should expect to have actual conversations, not just promotional fluff. They argued that Mel was being too sensitive and that she should have been able to handle some light criticism without storming off. Others were firmly Team Mel, saying that Kelly had been condescending from the start and that Mel had every right to leave when she felt disrespected. They argued that there was a difference between keeping it real and being rude, and that Kelly had crossed that line. They pointed out that Mel had been nothing but professional and gracious until Kelly started making pointed comments about her career. They said that Mel standing up for herself was not overreacting, it was setting a boundary. Then there were people in the middle who thought both women handled it poorly. They said that Kelly should have been more careful with her words and more willing to acknowledge when Mel was clearly hurt by what she said. But they also thought Mel could have communicated her frustration without getting so defensive, and that walking off was a bit dramatic. They felt like the whole thing could have been avoided if both women had just taken a breath and tried to understand each other instead of digging in. The debate also brought up larger conversations about how women, especially women in entertainment, are expected to behave. Some people pointed out that if two men had gotten into a heated argument on a talk show, it would have been seen as passionate or intense. But because it was two women, people were quick to call them dramatic or emotional. Others argued that gender had nothing to do with it, and that anyone, regardless of gender, who walked off a talk show in the middle of an interview would face criticism. There were also discussions about the nature of talk show interviews and how much hosts should push their guests. Some people thought Kelly was doing her job by asking tough questions and not just letting Mel control the narrative. They said that good interviews require some level of challenge, and that guests should be prepared to defend their positions. Others felt that there was a time and place for hard-hitting journalism, and a daytime talk show was not it. They argued that guests come on these shows expecting a friendly, supportive environment, and that ambushing them with criticism was unfair. The clash between Kelly and Mel also highlighted something that a lot of artists deal with, but do not always talk about publicly, which is the struggle of being known for one thing and trying to establish yourself as something more. Mel was far from the only person who had experienced this. Countless musicians, actors, and public figures have fought against being pigeonholed. And it is a frustrating battle because the very thing that made you famous can become the thing that holds you back. For Mel specifically, the Spice Girls were both a blessing and a curse. They gave her a platform, fame, financial security, and incredible experiences, but they also created expectations and comparisons that followed her everywhere. Every solo album she released was measured against the success of the Spice Girls. Every tour she did was compared to the massive stadiums the group had sold out. And every interview she gave inevitably circled back to those same 5 years of her life, no matter how much she had done since then. Kelly, on the other hand, had her own version of this struggle. She won American Idol, which launched her career, but she spent years trying to prove that she was a legitimate artist and not just a product of a reality show. She had fought for creative control, pushed back against record labels, and worked hard to be taken seriously. So in theory, she should have been able to empathize with what Mel was going through. But sometimes, when you have fought your own battles and come out the other side, it is easy to forget how raw those feelings can be for someone still in the middle of it. The comment Kelly made about Mel being at her best during the Spice Girls era was something that probably reflected Kelly's own relationship with her past. Kelly had made peace with American Idol being part of her story. She had accepted that it would always come up, and she had learned to talk about it without feeling diminished by it. But what Kelly did not account for was that everyone's journey is different. And just because she had reached that level of acceptance did not mean Mel had, or that Mel should have. What made the whole situation even more charged was the public nature of it. If this conversation had happened in private, both women might have been able to express their frustrations, clear the air, and move forward. But because it happened on television, in front of an audience and cameras, every word carried more weight. Both of them knew that whatever they said would be clipped, shared, analyzed, and judged by millions of people. That added pressure made it harder for either of them to back down or admit they might have been wrong. The way Kelly handled the situation after Mel left also spoke volumes. By not addressing it when the show came back, and by making a comment about Mel not being able to handle the truth, Kelly essentially doubled down on her position. She made it clear that she did not think she had done anything wrong and that she believed Mel was the one who overreacted. That stance earned her support from people who appreciated her refusing to apologize for being honest. But it also alienated people who thought she should have shown more grace. Mel, for her part, stayed relatively quiet immediately after the incident. She did not rush to social media to defend herself or attack Kelly. She did not release a statement or do another interview to tell her side of the story. That silence was powerful in its own way. It suggested that Mel did not feel the need to justify her decision to walk off, that she was confident in her choice and did not owe anyone an explanation. It also left people speculating about what she was thinking and feeling, which kept the story alive even longer. The longer both women stayed quiet, the more the public filled in the blanks with their own interpretations. People who supported Kelly assumed Mel was too embarrassed to address what happened. People who supported Mel assumed Kelly knew she had messed up and was hoping the story would blow over. In reality, both women were probably just trying to process what had happened and figure out how to move forward without making things worse. The incident also raised questions about what happens next. Would Kelly address it on a future episode of her show? Would Mel ever come back, or was this bridge permanently burned? Would they both just move on and pretend it never happened? Talk show drama usually fades pretty quickly, but this felt different because it was so raw and real. It was not a planned bit or a misunderstanding that could be easily cleared up. It was a genuine conflict between two strong personalities who both felt wronged. For Kelly, the incident was a reminder that even when you think you are just having an honest conversation, you have to be mindful of how your words land. Intent does not always equal impact, and saying something you believe to be true does not make it appropriate or helpful. Kelly might have genuinely thought she was giving Mel tough love or keeping the conversation real, but what Mel heard was judgment and dismissiveness. That disconnect is what turned a potentially interesting discussion into a full-blown argument. For Mel, the incident was a reminder that standing up for yourself, even when it is uncomfortable, is sometimes necessary. She could have stayed in her seat, laughed off Kelly's comments, and finished the interview with a smile. A lot of people probably would have, but Mel decided that protecting her dignity and her sense of self was more important than keeping the peace or avoiding controversy. That took courage, even if some people saw it as an overreaction. The whole situation also served as a reminder to viewers that the people we see on television are human beings with feelings, insecurities, and breaking points. It is easy to watch talk shows and forget that the guests are not just there to entertain us or promote their projects. They are real people with real struggles. And sometimes those struggles bubble up in unexpected ways. Mel did not come on that show planning to have a confrontation. She probably thought it would be a fun, light-hearted interview where she could talk about her music and connect with fans. But once the conversation took a turn she did not like, she reacted the way any person might when they feel attacked or disrespected. Kelly, too, was just trying to do her job and have what she thought was a meaningful conversation. She did not set out to hurt Mel or cause a scene. But in trying to be honest and push past surface-level questions, she ended up touching a nerve that she did not anticipate. And once both women were in defensive mode, there was no easy way to de-escalate. At the end of the day, this clash between Mel C and Kelly Clarkson was about more than just one interview gone wrong. It was about legacy, identity, respect, and the complicated dynamics of being a woman in the public eye. It was about the struggle to be seen as more than one thing, and the frustration of feeling like no matter what you do, people will always reduce you to your past. It was about two talented, accomplished women who both felt misunderstood and who both reacted in ways that made sense to them in the moment, even if those reactions made the situation worse. Whether you think Kelly was out of line or Mel overreacted, the one thing everyone can agree on is that this was one of the most memorable and uncomfortable moments in recent talk show history. It was real, it was messy, and it reminded everyone that even the most polished professional people can have moments where emotions take over and things fall apart. So, what do you think? Was Kelly just being honest, or did she cross a line? Did Mel have every right to walk off, or should she have handled it differently? Drop a comment below and let us know where you stand. And if you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure you hit that subscribe button so you never miss another story.